Swank Ivy with another video about asexuality for you today. And I'm going to cover the topic of why do asexual people like childish things? If you've seen some of my other videos, you probably know what my thoughts are on this matter. However, I don't believe I have addressed that specific question directly, although I have a couple other videos that address the broader topic of maturity and why people associate not being interested in sex or relating to sex differently the way some asexual people do with immaturity or an embryonic state or just general childishness. And I'm going to cover my answer to why do aces like childish things in 5 ways of answering. Here we go with number 1. We don't. I wouldn't say that asexual people, at least not exclusively, like childish things. There are certainly some asexual people who like things that are ostensibly made for children, things that can be enjoyed by children, and there's nothing wrong with that inherently. But I think one of the most important things to remember about this so-called accusation is that it comes from people who are approaching it from a disingenuous place. They typically are not saying this in an authentic, questioning way. They're saying it to demean us. They're saying it because they want to suggest something is wrong with us, something is immature, something is clear that we have to grow out of, and that it is reflected in our choices of entertainment or decorating or clothing or simply lifestyle as well. So people who are approaching this question with an intent to invalidate us are typically actually coming at it from an immature perspective themselves. They're not able to interrogate, say, media that they perceive as childish from a nuanced standpoint. They see, oh, that's animation, or that is child-friendly, therefore it must be incomplex, therefore it must be being enjoyed by people I don't respect, and I'm going to use that against them. I'm going to look at what they enjoy, and I'm going to take that automatically as a sign that that person that I already wanted to dismiss and criticize is in fact immature. What's really interesting about it is that they will give unfair weight to anything that proves their theory that we're childish. They'll say, oh, you have all of those stuffed animals. Oh, you wear a shirt that has a cartoon on it. Oh, you really enjoy Disney movies, or you like to go to Disneyland. You enjoy music that I see as childish. You enjoy pastimes I see as childish. You wear little bows in your hair that I think are childish. They will take those and they will let those speak louder in their mind about their opinion of you than do aspects of your life that are indisputably very adult. So you may have, as an asexual person, some interests or some indications of preferences that people like this, people who want to invalidate you, will see as childish and will act like it's self-evident that that means you're childish, but they won't look at other things like whether you're a responsible person, whether you fulfill your responsibilities or your obligations. They won't take the usual signs of maturity to actually mean that you're mature because they want to see you as otherwise, and they will unfairly weight those things that they see in your environment or in your pastimes. They will take those as evidence while not considering other evidence because they're biased. What's also really interesting about the childish accusation is that asexual people who are not particularly into cartoons or don't like Disney or don't wear cute little hair barrettes or whatever, even if they don't have any of those tendencies, they will still be judged as childish by these kinds of people, because some of these people will see adult lives as synonymous with having a sex life or having a romantic relationship that manifests in a traditional way. And if you don't have that, they'll use that as evidence that you're not really an adult or that there's something wrong with you. And you don't have to have all these other trappings of a so-called childish life to be accused of that as an asexual person. All you need is the asexuality. And, as most of you who watch my videos know, none of these people need any actual insight into your life to suggest that they know very well that they can see signs in your life just based on very superficial aspects of it, that they know your inner core, or that they can obviously see what's really going on with you, or see some kind of regressive tendency in your life because of choices that you've made. But they heap all of this understanding onto these very superficial aspects of you and act like it describes the whole of you. And that is, on its face, a very childish way of looking at the world. It's very black and white. So it really says more about them than it does about the people they're talking about. Now, even though I have heard this accusation many times as an adult, like, oh, you're a child, or you're obviously stuck in some earlier phase of your development and that's tied in with your asexuality. Certainly I've heard these things. Nevertheless, I, as an adult person, have never been worried about whether I seem mature to other adults. It's just not something that you think about if you are secure in your maturity. I'm not sitting around trying to think of what I should do or shouldn't do to encourage or avoid certain perceptions of my maturity. I don't worry that someone's going to think I'm childish. If that person judges me, like, why do I care if whatever I'm doing makes me happy? So it's actually a very immature state to be worrying about how mature you are. And I feel like it kind of takes you back to high school, where people are worrying about, am I cool enough? Am I socially acceptable? And like, cool people don't really worry about whether they are cool. They just are. Like, if you're worrying about that, if you're worrying about others' perception of you, I think you have some thinking to do about whether it's really that other person that you're accusing's issue of whether they're mature or not. It seems an awful lot like projection. So that is my first point in response to, like, why are aces into childish things? We aren't. Number 2, what if we do? So really, like, what if we do like supposedly childish things? We should start by examining the concept of what makes something childish. And I think that, again, if you don't apply an appropriately nuanced look at, say, media, you might be tempted to reduce it to some very shallow understandings, such as somebody who thinks anything that's animated is automatically for children, or must be childish, or cannot be as complex as something that's made for adults. They may reduce it to one element and write it off and judge anybody who enjoys that thing as being a childish person. But what makes something child-friendly is not inherently immature sometimes. A lot of times, what can get classified as at least child-friendly media is based on what it lacks. Usually kids' media will have less violence, less foul language, and yes, less sex. Now, it is true that there are some people, asexual people among them, who do want to see less sexual or completely non-sexual media, and they will be more likely to be able to find that in so-called family-friendly media. And they may have their own reasons for this. I mean, there could certainly be people who are very repulsed by sexual situations and don't want to see it in their media, so they'd be uncomfortable with encountering a lot of adult media that just puts it in everything, sometimes without warning. But also, I think that there's something to be said for wanting to relate to the media. And even though obviously there are some asexual people who choose to make sex part of their lives, even if they still identify as asexual, it's not the behavior, it's the attraction experience that designates whether you're asexual. So I mean, not all asexual people don't have this experience or don't value this experience for other non-sexual attraction related reasons. And of course, also there are asexual people who are on the gray spectrum, the demi spectrum, that, you know, they may have an asexual life with a couple of gray areas on the spectrum, right? So they may still appreciate less sexual media. They may prefer there to be less of that or none of that in their media. And there's nothing wrong with really wanting to understand the motivations of the characters, to feel that you're going to be able to relate to these situations. You're not going to be watching something and suddenly it becomes about whether these people are going to get together, or that you're supposed to have a lot of feelings about whether these people get together, or kind of bring your own recognition of what it feels like to want those kinds of relationships, and, you know, kind of end up disappointed that it all became about that. It may just be, because I've heard a lot of asexual people say sometimes when there's media with a lot of sex in it, sex dominated storylines, it's really hard to follow for some of us, where we're like, that came out of nowhere. We don't understand why that character is acting like that, because maybe that's not part of our lives. So there's nothing wrong with wanting to be able to understand the motivations of characters, or to see things that are closer to your own life. So the implication from our detractors is, of course, that we're avoiding that media for maybe trauma-related or immaturity-related reasons, that we can't handle that kind of complexity or whatever. And that's really not that person's business as to why we might prefer that media that has little to no sex in it. But I think that they're underestimating how many people want relatable media. They want it too. Almost everybody wants something that they can personally relate to, or at least their favorite genres tend to be something that they can relate to. And you know, the ignorant comments that asexual people will sometimes get from, you know, from people who want to pigeonhole us as childish, for those of us who might actually prefer this sort of entertainment. They also tend to be people who are very dismissive of opinions that are not their own, such as all these angry dudes who act like they would never be caught dead going to see a chick flick or anything that they dub beneath them. And when they sort of take a crack at justifying this for with something that doesn't sound like blatant sexism, they'll just say, oh, well, it's not interesting to me. How am I supposed to relate to a movie about a girl boss, or whatever the, you know, the misperception is of why that movie, sight unseen, is going to be not relatable to them. You know, they can get pretty catty about it, actually, where they'll be like, I wouldn't be caught dead at the Barbie movie and stuff like that. They've already decided it's ridiculous and silly because it's in their perception for somebody else. The audience is not them. And they don't see themselves as childish or closed-minded for saying, I have this opinion, this preconceived notion about what that movie is going to be about, and saying, that's not for me, I don't want to watch it. But when it's us, they're like, oh, that's a problem, you can't take it, there's something wrong with you if that's not something you want to expose yourself to. And, you know, again, not their business. But it does tend to be this very sort of black and white thinking, where they seem to think it's okay for them to make decisions based on their preferences, but we're not allowed to have those preferences because it means there's something wrong with us. And finally, it's really common for people to assume that if something is family friendly, or if it's animated, or if it has elements of things that they're used to being for children, that it necessarily lacks complexity and can't be worth watching for an adult. So that is again a sort of sight unseen judgment that people like this tend to make. And it does go back to, I already wanted to see people like you this way, and I'm using this as evidence because I think it makes it look less like I'm just a bigot, that I'm basing it on some kind of fact I know about you, and that an adult wouldn't be watching a TV show like that unless there was something wrong with them. But, have you watched this show? Do you know that it is not a worthwhile story? And obviously there is children's media, especially very young children's media, that generally isn't interesting to adults. I mean, most of us are not going to sit around and watch Barney, but that's not the case for some other things that people can watch with their kids and genuinely enjoy. Media that is created on multiple levels, media that is not created exclusively for children. Moving on. Why do aces like childish things? We don't care. So this sounds a little flippant on its face, but it actually ends up being pretty multi-layered and nuanced here when you start to talk about being part of an out group. As an asexual person, there is a relatively fundamental aspect of a lot of people's lives that we don't experience, and that is alienating. But those of us who have accepted being asexual, have gotten used to it, have been out about it, have had discussions about it, have learned many multifaceted aspects of it, have spent a lot of time kind of becoming an in-group by being part of an out-group. As marginalized people who are used to not necessarily being able to fully participate in certain aspects of typical human society, we tend to be a little bit more comfortable on the outskirts sometimes. And so a lot of us will be like, okay, I'm already weird. People already think I'm weird. So what's one more thing to add to my pile of things that are weird? Like, that's obviously not everybody. There are plenty of very self-conscious people. There are people who don't talk about their asexuality and do prefer to try to fit in, don't make a spectacle of themselves, whatever. Maybe they're asexual, but they're not activists, they're not out, etc. But part of the reason that we get this kind of comment is when we do talk about it, someone will say like, oh, well, that means that you're childish. Why are there so many of you who are in these childish fandoms or like these childish clothes or seem really immature to me? And I think that when you have something going on like this in a pretty big fundamental aspect of your identity, you'll just be kind of in a screw it, I'm gonna do what I want kind of mentality. So if something about those things appeals to you, you'll be less self-conscious about embracing those things and saying, I'm going to do what I want, and people can think whatever they want to. Obviously, it is not true across the board, but we may be less susceptible to being shamed out of what we truly enjoy. Moving on, why do aces like childish things? Well, it's not just us. So, if you have ever gone to an anime convention, or if you have spent any time in cartoon fandoms, you can't miss that it can be highly sexual. There is a lot of sex talk, there's a lot of shipping. It is generally highly sexual, and these are also things that get called childish. Just like when we do them, people say, "Oh, that's a symptom. That's proof that you being asexual is part of this social progression that you have been arrested at a specific stage of development and you're not able to move past this, and that they'll take your asexuality and your interests in, say, a cartoon, or that you go to conventions and dress up, they'll say that's just very childish, and see it as related to you being asexual. But most people in those spaces are not asexual, and a lot of the people who are in those spaces do talk about sex and like sex and experience sexual attraction, and in general are not what these people are thinking of when they think of those places. They think we're a bunch of repressed nerds and that all of these things tie together to indicate dysfunction, but we're not even close to the majority of these spaces. Now, it's certainly weird to single us out and say, well, that makes you immature, but it doesn't make these other people immature, that they all get a pass. But I think that a lot of the people who are not asexual who do those things, they also get judged. I mean, I've certainly seen it. I've certainly seen a lot of judgment from outside of those communities toward those communities, as if there's something inherently childish about those interests. And then there's people who say it's okay to like that stuff, but only in these specific circumstances. Like, I've seen some people say, oh, well, it's fine to watch those cartoons with your kid. Like, yeah, you should be watching cartoons with your kid. You should be into whatever they're into, but they don't want you to be into it inherently. They don't want you to genuinely enjoy it as a form of entertainment that's for you. So sometimes they will give you a pass if they think that you're watching it for your kid, or you're doing something for your kid, or for some other reason. Maybe you're a children's book author and that's why you read children's books, or you are a costume creator and therefore they'll give you a pass because they think it's art or it's fashion. But they're really looking for a way to judge you and put you in a category, if they just want to bag on you for being asexual. Also, if you do actually dial down your respect for people who like child-friendly media, just because you hear that they like this thing and you don't respect it, I feel like it means you just don't know how to have fun. And that's sad, and it's also extremely immature to be like, okay, there are these adult-approved ways of having fun. You can drink, you can watch sports, you can play gambling games, like these ideas of things that are very adult. And maybe that's partly because it's actually restricted to children, so you think you feel like a big boy for doing them. But like, depending on that, for whether you're allowed to have that fun, just seems so like boring and depressing. It's like, if you inherently like something and you're enjoying this form of entertainment, does it matter what somebody thinks of you? Though, of course, in people who want to see us as deviants, people who are accusing us and broader queer community members as, being dangerous, some of them may use that to suggest that we want to get into children's spaces or have access to kids, and I'm like, oh, come on. That's obviously not what anybody's doing. If they're genuinely participating in these spaces. And generally they're not actively looking to interact with kids. Like, I know I don't. I don't look for children to talk to. I've been very on my guard if I did get messages from younger people on, say, Tumblr or Amino. If somebody in the Steven Universe fandom would message me or want to talk about, can we make fan art, or will you play my quiz or something, like, I don't want to get real friendly with people who are really young, I like to be friendly to them. I like to be someone that they could look up to, but I definitely don't interact with them in any like intentional way where I'm like, oh, I really need to get like little kids to pay attention to my content or whatever. That's absolutely not something that I've ever tried to do. Creeps exist, but that's definitely not like the vibe of what anyone that I've ever known has done. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who depend for their confidence on making other people feel inadequate. It's all pretty sad, but we've all met those people who just really need to tear down what you like so that they can affirm what they like as being better. And it is ultimately a very immature way to look at the world. And lastly, why do asexual people like childish things? Would that be the worst thing ever? Really, at the end of the day, if you actually are childish, who cares? Like, as long as you're not hurting anybody, as long as you're not suffering, as long as you're not making someone else suffer, that is your business. You can be childish. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. And other people's kind of fixation on, like, you can't be like that. You need to grow out of something that I've decided means that you are stuck in some kind of repressed state. Like, get off my ass. Get out of my comments. What are you doing here? Why are you concerned about how a stranger is living her life? So honestly, just who cares? If you actually are a little bit childish, it's like not the end of the world, right? I wouldn't recommend like being secure with being immature for your whole life, but there is a time and a place for being immature. And some things that are considered childish, it's like, all right, you know what? There's some humor that is utterly ridiculously juvenile, and it's like, I'm still gonna laugh at a fart joke. I'm not worried about it, you know? So it's not the end of the world if sometimes there are elements of childhood that you never left behind. It's really a pretty fun way to live, I think. People who think our supposedly childish choices say something really negative about us tend to be people who are not secure in their own lives. The snap judgments that they make of us really say a lot more about them than they do about us. And really, ultimately, I am not worried about earning that person's respect just because they came into my comments or said something to me at a party about thinking that I'm childish. Like, do I need to earn the respect of that person? Do I need that person to like me or think that I'm cool? Do I need to change my life so that somebody who makes that kind of snap judgment will respect me? I don't see how their opinion of me should be in the way of my opinion of me. And it's certainly not louder than my opinion of them for wanting to do that to me. It seems like just a sort of mean way to interact with other people, to try really hard to make them insecure or feel inadequate. I don't want to impress a person like that or feel like they should be given any control over how I live my life or what I feel like I need to change. It kind of goes back to my earlier point of who cares, because I don't. It really wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if somebody somewhere that doesn't know me very well thinks I'm childish. And that concludes my ramble about why people might say this, some rebuttals, some sort of leaning into it, and some contradicting it, depending on the approach. But at the end of the day, we're gonna see judgmental people say ignorant things to us and use things against us that really are not negative. But it's just a symptom of being a closed-minded person who doesn't really want to learn and doesn't really want to understand another person. And that's their problem. So don't accept that it's your problem if you've ever had this said to you, and live your life. Embrace what you want to embrace, and don't be embarrassed if sometimes the choices that you make and the preferences that you have are thought childish by some jerk.